Diary, hello from the cave. I'm already too late. I'm trying to shoot an iPad video to tell you what to buy in 2023 to gain experience of iPads, and already our princess has said it's too long, too much waiting, too much faffing. I'm going to take a little nap, so I better get this video finished quickly, otherwise she's going to be very cross with me, and we will not be able to go out for our morning walk. What do you think, baby? Okay, let's get on with it, shall we? And then a morning walk will be forthcoming. Friday, the 24th of November. And as I've said in my introduction, I've got to make this quick because our princess, who's up there, is wanting a walk. So today I'd like to talk about iPads, and why would that be? It's mostly because of other people. Well, it started out that way. In the class that I'm teaching, I get an increasing number of people who use iPads, and until now I've not used tablets because my previous forays into the tablet world have been with the Amazon Fire tablet, which is a rather cheap tablet. Amazon is, as Fire tablets, as you may know, are based on their own fork or their own version of Android that they got from Google a while back. So whereas Google keeps updating Android every year, Amazon does not, and their tablets suffer from that. iPads are simply better. I'll say it. Even as a lifelong Apple skeptic, I can honestly say that iPads are better. And I know that because, like I say, some of my students bring in iPads and say, "Oh, how do I do this?" And I look at them thinking, "Oh, I just don't know." So, as a result of that, I've decided I will buy my own iPad. But I thought I'd show you a couple of iPads I've got so far, which just don't make the grade. But the side story is, if you're an Android person, if you're a Windows person, if you're an Apple skeptic, then don't just take my word for it, but get yourself an iPad, and you can get some earlier ones very cheaply. But I'm going to show you some of the ones that I've got, which are basically useless. So you shouldn't get those. I'll start off with the Generation 2 iPad. Now, the earlier iPads have got a big fat bezel. So you can see here one here, and that's on the screen. As you see, that's an iPad Generation 2. Now that, believe it or not, has this enormous interface here. It's got the original Apple interface in the same way that your iPod had. And that, believe it or not, is worth only about... I'm selling some of these, by the way. This is not a sales advert. But this guy here, I'm selling it for £20. No one has bought it. But it's basically a glorified web browser, and it's an Apple second generation iPad. It's only capable of the operating system 9.3.5. And the way that Apple works is that although it can still access the Apple Store, none of the applications that you might want to install are there because it's so old. Apple have stopped supporting the applications and have told all the developers to support them as well. So although you can technically access the Apple Store, there's nothing to buy or there's nothing to purchase free. So don't get that unless you want a browser and unless you want to spend £20. Another iPad that's come one way is the Generation 4 iPad. Now, I've got one here. Again, this is for sale. And I'm selling it for £30. And yet again, no one has bought it. I mean, this is outrageous. I mean, I think Uncle Steve would be turning in his grave if he heard that someone was selling an iPad for only £30, but that is in fact the truth. Now, this brings me to mind the fact that iPads come with one or more cases, and the Apple cases are pretty cool. Again, if you're an Apple user and you know iPads, just stop watching now. This is a video for people who don't know anything about iPads, which until about 6 months ago was me. So if you're an Android user, you're a non-Apple tablet user, this is the video for you, because I really think, just so that you know, you should get an iPad. Okay, so we're back to the Generation 4 iPad now. The early ones had a home button. Home button. But the home button on Generation 4 is just what it says. It's a home button. There's no fingerprint reader there. Just a home button. Still, it's quite useful. The Apple case, I was got sidetracked, but there's the Apple case, and it's a magnetic case. So it rather nattily can be detached, and it can... come on, demonstration, don't let me down. Here we go. Yep, it works even. Try to back on. So the good thing about these cases, the Apple originals at least, is that it's an automatic on-off switch. So as you close the iPad, it switches off the iPad, or it suspends it. And an iPad can suspend for days or weeks, and it's fine. The other thing, of course, is this case can be suitably changed like that, so that you've got a stand. So I'm not used to this camera. This is, by the way, I've moved the recording studio temporarily to the cave. And that's why you can see behind them, got bicycles and all sorts of things like that. So the iPad original case, so the Apple original cases, even for the original iPads, this is a 5 or 6 year old iPad, were still pretty costly. Anyway, I'm selling this case and the iPad for only, and again, no one's bought it. So I've got yet another iPad to show you, which is Generation 5. So Generation 5, we do have some advancements. And if you buy Generation 5 iPad, oh, I haven't put their price down here. Generation 5 iPad, you could expect to pay, they're roughly about 140 GBP. And what are you getting for that money? So you're getting, actually, now we're getting a usable system, because with the Generation 5 iPad, we've got an app store that works, and we've got an iPad which has got a home button here, but also a Touch ID sensor. So with this, you authenticate using Touch ID, and you can log in. And so if you've got a banking app, again, you'd log in with your Touch ID and you authenticate with your fingerprint, and it's a pretty secure system. So Generation 5 is probably the entry level iPad that I could recommend. It's about £140. I'll mention again, by the way, if you're going to get an iPad and you want a case, it's nice if the case covers the bottom, covers the edges, because what's going to happen if you put this in a rucksack and you've got the standard case. So here's the Apple original case. You'll see it just covers the iPad screen. It does not cover the edges of the iPad, and because of that, the iPad will get scratched. So I thoroughly recommend, if you're going to get an iPad accessory, you're going to need this cover, which doubles as a stand. But if you get a third-party one, it can come with this this arrangement here, which protects the side of the iPad. So bear that in mind for accessories. Now, I did a bit more research and found out that the Generation 6 iPad is the one which can support iPad OS 17. So iPad OS 17 is the latest and greatest operating system and the current operating system. So Apple has a policy of not letting the current OS work on really old iPads. Now, sometimes that's for a valid reason. For example, it's got a 32-bit processor. But other times it's just because they kind of want you to buy the latest kit. So they've got a well-established track record. And they're pretty good. To be fair to Apple, they're pretty good. They don't obsolete stuff immediately. But if you want an iPad with the latest operating system, you've got to select an iPad 6th generation or later. And how much would you be paying for that? You'd be paying approximately 190 GBP for a renewed iPad. Again, I would recommend you go to Amazon Prime, and I recommend you choose a Prime supplier, and then that way you can buy an iPad, and if you actually don't like it, you should be able to return it. But make sure you're on Amazon Prime and you buy from a Prime supplier. Okay, so we're up to Generation 6. I've been doing more research, and the current generation of iPad is Generation 10. And Apple has a thing whereby they usually sell the previous generation. So when they announced generation 10 of iPad, you can still buy generation 9 in the same way that you've got generation iPhone 15, but you can still buy generation 14 of the iPhone. And they do that to support less wealthy markets that can't afford the latest generation. So whilst you can still buy, you can actually buy a generation 9 iPad from Apple. I've got it scrolling down. So from Apple UK, it's £369, and refurbished, I've seen one for about £285. So let's call it £300. So from about £300, you can get a Generation 9 iPad, and that's got the hex-core A13 processor. So now I will mention, by the way, that the iPad 5 that I've got is a bit sluggish. So these older iPads, the iPad 5, which comes at about 140 GBP, whilst it can access the App Store, and most of the applications are there, so all the browsers are there, and things like Strava are there, and what not WhatsApp, but many other applications are there. It's a bit sluggish. So we're now on to the Generation 9 iPad, which isn't sluggish, and the current generation is Generation 10. And the Generation 10 iPads, so I've got, we're scrolling onto the current iPads. So the Generation 10 iPads, about £440 from Amazon, but I wouldn't recommend it. And the Generation iPad Pro from Amazon or Apple, it starts at about £800. So for me, that's too much money to spend on what I would call a whimsy. I mean, I'd love to learn about iPadOS, but I don't want to spend £800 becoming an expert. I'd rather spend, let's say, £500. So I've decided that there are two iPads that you should really consider to buy. If you're strapped for cash and you want to get a system that can actually just about get by, then you should go for generation. Sorry, there are three iPads. Let's start again. The three iPads that you should buy. The absolute minimum you should buy is a Generation 6 iPad, and for that you're going to spend about £200. Again, if you select larger disk sizes or Wi-Fi and cellular, I don't know why you'd ever want cellular these days, because you can bridge it from your phone. But if you want larger disk sizes, you're going to spend more money. But let's talk about the base configuration. So for Generation 6 iPad, you'll be spending about 190 GBP. If you want something that's nice and zippy and reasonable value, you'll be spending about £300, and that's your Generation 9 iPad. And that's a renewed, not a new one, it's a renewed iPad. And I would say if you want to spend to get something that's actually new, you should go for an iPad Air Gen 5. So why is that? That's because the iPad Air Gen 5 has the Apple M1 processor. So Apple is transitioning all its computers to the M series, and the M series processors are very powerful, and to put them in an iPad is a bit of an overkill. But the good news is that it's likely to be very, very long life, and your iPad will last a long time. There's very little doubt that they'll be supporting the M series processor for years to come. So if you buy at least an M1 processor based iPad, I think you've got at least another 5 years of life left in it. So I think that's great. And I think the minimum version you need there is the iPad Air. That's the current generation, iPad Air Gen 5, that's 2022. Like I said, I don't recommend the iPad Pro, it's just too expensive. As an alternative, you could go for the iPad Pro 2021, but you're going to have to get a refurbished one, and you're going to be spending like £600 on a refurbished device, and seems like a lot of money to spend on something that's not quite new. I've got an example here for £600, but that is actually a better spec than the iPad Air 2022. So if you can get a good one, again via the Amazon store, the renewed store, then maybe that's a good thing for you. So where are we? I think the iPad's the best tablet you can get. Depending on your budget, you're going to be spending from about £200 upwards. And we're not done yet, of course, because Apple has a way of making you spend more money. Because, of course, you need the iPad and you need the case and you possibly need the stylus. And I just wanted to point out that on the accessories front, you will be amazed at how much you can spend when you try to get a keyboard for your iPad. Now, again, you can get this kind of case, which is a magnetic case, which protects the front of the iPad, and it can be used as a stand. But many companies, including Apple, make a stand and keyboard. And if you're going to be surprised about Apple pricing and even third-party pricing, you've got to look at their keyboards. So here we are. We've got a keyboard for £189, and that's a good price apparently, because the actual Apple keyboard, and I hope you're sitting down, on the Black Friday pricing, it's down 20% and it's only £260. I think it's £320 for a keyboard. So the Apple Magic Keyboard, which is this fancy keyboard which supports your iPad and has a keyboard here, is at the Black Friday. It's £260. So don't forget when you're doing your budgeting for your iPad, if you want a keyboard, it's going to add at least £100, and then you've got the pencil as well. So that's it, Darry. That's all I can tell you about iPads. I do recommend Windows users and Android users. You do invest in an iPad just to get the feel of it, because it really is a decent device, and don't knock it until you've used it, basically. Okay, Darry, thank you for watching. I'll have to think what I need to buy before next Monday, Black Friday and Cyber Monday. I need to make a decision by then. Speak to you soon.